Justice Adunni Alyamide adjusted her reading glasses as she reviewed the morning's case files in her chambers at the Lagos High Court. 20 years of climbing from a struggling law student to one of Nigeria's most respected judges had taught her that life had a peculiar sense of humor. But nothing could have prepared her for the name that would appear on her docket that Tuesday morning in March. The State versus Chinedu Okechukwu. Case of advanced fee fraud. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the defendant's name again. Chinedu Okechukwu. The same Chinedu who had convinced 25-year-old Adunni that he was a successful businessman looking for a serious relationship. The same man who had borrowed 2.3 million naira from her law school savings, promising to triple it through his import business connections. The same heartless fraudster who had disappeared into thin air, leaving her broke, heartbroken, and nearly forced to drop out of law school. That was 15 years ago, when she was still Adunni Akinwale, a naive final-year law student at the University of Lagos. Now, she was Justice Adunni Alyamide, having taken her late husband's name and built a reputation as the Iron Lady of the Lagos judiciary, known for her sharp mind, impeccable integrity, and zero tolerance for financial crimes. Ma, her clerk knocked gently on the door. The 10 a.m. case is ready. Advanced fee fraud matter. The defendant's lawyer is asking for a plea bargain. Adunni's lips curved into what could charitably be called a smile, but her eyes held the glint of steel. Tell them we'll proceed as scheduled. No plea bargains today. The courtroom was packed as usual. Financial crime cases always drew crowds in Lagos. A mix of curious spectators, potential victims, and journalists hunting for scandalous stories. Adunni took her place on the bench, her black robes lending her an air of authority that made even seasoned lawyers straighten their spines. All rise for the Honorable Justice Adunni Alyamide. As the courtroom settled, the defendants were led in. Adunni maintained her professional composure, but her heart hammered against her ribs as she saw him. Chinedu Okechukwu, now 45, had aged considerably. His once handsome face was softer, his hairline had receded, and he wore the rumpled look of a man whose luck had finally run out. He was dressed in a cheap suit that had seen better days, a far cry from the designer clothes he'd worn when he was spending her money. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she sat, elevated to one of the highest positions in the Nigerian legal system, while the man who had nearly destroyed her future stood before her as a common criminal. The prosecutor, Mrs. Funmi Adebayo, stood to read the charges. Your Lordship, the defendant stands accused of defrauding multiple victims through advance fee fraud schemes, totaling over 15 million naira. The prosecution has overwhelming evidence including bank records, text messages, and testimonies from 7 victims. Chinedu's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who was clearly taking the case pro bono or for a pittance, stood up. Your Lordship, my client wishes to enter a plea of not guilty. We believe the prosecution's case is circumstantial at best. Adunni studied Chinedu carefully. He hadn't recognized her yet. Why would he? She was now 15 years older, wore judicial robes instead of student clothes, and had the confidence of a woman who had conquered her world. To him, she was just another judge, another obstacle between him and freedom. But oh, how wrong he was. Very well, Adunni said, her voice carrying the authority of her position. Let's hear the prosecution's case. What followed was a masterclass in legal proceedings. Mrs. Adebayo methodically laid out Chinedu's pattern of fraud. He would target educated, professional women through social media and dating apps. He'd present himself as a successful businessman with connections abroad, then gradually introduce investment opportunities that required upfront payments. Once he had their money, he'd vanish. The similarities to Adunni's own experience were striking and painful. Victim after victim took the stand, each telling variations of the same story she knew by heart. Professional women, doctors, teachers, engineers, who had believed in love and lost their savings to this predator. During the lunch recess, Adunni remained in her chambers, staring at the case file. Her personal copy of the police report from 15 years ago lay in her desk drawer. She kept it all these years as a reminder of how far she'd come. The investigating officer had told her then that Chinedu was a ghost in the wind who would probably never be caught. How wrong they'd all been. When court resumed, it was time for the defense. Chinedu's lawyer put up a valiant but hopeless fight. The evidence was overwhelming. bank records showing the transfers, screenshots of his fake social media profiles, even CCTV footage of him withdrawing victims' money from ATMs. But the real drama began when Chinedu himself took the stand. His lawyer had advised against it, but Chinedu's arrogance, the same trait that had made him so convincing as a fraudster, compelled him to try to charm his way out of trouble one last time. "Your lordship," he began, his voice carrying that same smooth confidence that had once swept Adunni off her feet. "I am not the man the prosecution has painted me to be. Yes, I may have made some poor business decisions, but I never intended to defraud anyone. These women gave me money willingly for legitimate business ventures that unfortunately failed." Adunni leaned forward slightly, her voice deadly calm. "Mr. Okechukwu, you mentioned legitimate business ventures. Can you elaborate on your business experience?" "Well, your lordship, I've been in import-export for over 20 years. I have connections in Dubai, China, even America. Sometimes deals fall through. That's business." "I see. And you've been doing this for 20 years, you say?" "Yes, ma. So you would have been actively running these businesses around 2008, 2009? Chinedu nodded confidently, not seeing the trap. "Absolutely, your lordship. Those were actually some of my best years." Adunni made a note, her expression unreadable. "And during these best years, you were based where exactly?" "Lagos, primarily. But I traveled frequently for business." "Traveled frequently. I see." Adunni paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Mr. Okechukwu, do you recall ever doing business with law students? Perhaps targeting them specifically because they might have access to education loans or family money?" Chinedu's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "No, your lordship. I don't specifically target any group. Business opportunities come from all walks of life." "Indeed they do." Adunni's voice was silk over steel. "Tell me, do you remember a young woman named Adunni Akinwale? Final year law student at Unilag, around 2009. The color drained from Chinedu's face so quickly that several people in the courtroom noticed his sudden pallor. His eyes darted up to the judge's bench, really looking at her for the first time. Behind the glasses, the judicial wig, the authority of her position, recognition dawned like a slow-motion car crash. I don't." He stammered, his legendary smooth-talking ability deserting him completely. "You don't remember? How odd. Because I remember you quite clearly, Mr. Okechukwu. I remember how you convinced me you were a successful businessman. I remember how you told me you loved me and wanted to build a future together. I remember how you borrowed 2.3 million naira from my education savings, promising to triple it through your import connections." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Journalists scribbled frantically, sensing they'd stumbled onto the story of the year. "And I remember," Adunni continued, her voice rising slightly, "how you vanished the next day, leaving me unable to pay my final year fees. I remember having to defer my graduation by a year while I worked 3 jobs to save enough money to complete my education. I remember crying myself to sleep for months, wondering how I could have been so stupid." Chinedu looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His lawyer sat frozen, probably calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this disaster. "Your lordship," the defense lawyer finally managed. "Perhaps we should discuss a recess to address potential conflict of interest." "Oh, there's no conflict of interest here." Adunni cut him off smoothly. "You see, Mr. Okechukwu is not being charged for what he did to me. That crime is outside the statute of limitations. He's being charged for what he did to these 7 women here in this courtroom. But his testimony about his 20 years of legitimate business has just been revealed as perjury, committed right here under oath." She leaned back in her chair, every inch the powerful judge she'd become. "However, I think it's only fair that Mr. Okechukwu understands exactly who he's standing before. You see, that naive young law student you scammed? She didn't let your theft destroy her dreams. She worked harder, studied longer, and graduated with first-class honors despite the delays you caused. She went on to become a prosecutor, then a senior advocate, and eventually earned appointment to this bench." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Chinedu swayed slightly, gripping the witness stand for support. So when you stand here today and lie about your legitimate business ventures, Adunni continued, you're lying to the very person whose life you tried to destroy 15 years ago. The difference is, that young woman grew into someone you clearly never expected to face again. What happened next would become Lagos courtroom legend. Chinedu, faced with the impossible irony of his situation, broke down completely. The smooth-talking confidence that had served him for decades crumbled as he realized he was trapped not just by evidence, but by the cosmic justice of facing his past victim who now held his fate in her hands. Your lordship, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I never imagined, that I'd amount to anything. Adunni's voice was ice-cold. That the law student whose future you tried to steal would one day sit in judgment over you? That your victims might actually matter beyond the money you could take from them. The prosecution's case, already strong, became ironclad when Chinedu's confession opened the floodgates. Faced with the surreal nightmare of being judged by his past victim, he began admitting to crimes dating back years, including details about Adunni's case that only the real perpetrator could have known. His lawyer tried desperately to salvage something from the wreckage, but Chinedu was beyond help. The psychological impact of facing Justice Adunni had shattered whatever composure he'd managed to maintain. When the time came for sentencing, Adunni delivered a judgment that would be studied in law schools for years to come. She sentenced Chinedu to 12 years in prison, not for revenge, but because the evidence demanded it. She ordered full restitution to all victims and added an additional charge of perjury for lying under oath about his business history. But her closing words were what made headlines across Nigeria. Mr. Okachukwu, you targeted educated women because you thought our ambitions made us vulnerable. You believed our dreams made us easy prey. Today, you've learned that the same education and ambition you tried to exploit has risen to judge you. Let this serve as a lesson to all who would prey on others. Your victims may grow stronger than you ever imagined, and justice, while sometimes delayed, has a remarkable memory. As Chinedu was led away in handcuffs, he looked back once at the woman whose life he'd tried to derail. Justice Adunni Alyamide sat unmoved, already reviewing the next case on her docket. She had work to do, and she was exactly where she belonged. Later that evening, in the quiet of her chambers, Adunni finally allowed herself a small smile. She pulled out the old police report from her drawer, looked at it one last time, then fed it into her paper shredder. Some chapters, once closed, didn't need to be preserved. The young law student who had been scammed and broken was gone. In her place sat a woman who had turned her pain into purpose, her victimization into victory. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe delivered justice more perfectly than any human court ever could. Outside her window, Lagos hummed with its usual chaos, but in courtroom 7, perfect justice had been served with a side of cosmic irony that even Nollywood couldn't have scripted better.